Good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to the webinar titled Scaling European eFuels. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Harry, the Content Director for Sustainable Aviation Futures Congress Europe. Over the next 60 minutes, our speakers will share their insights and perspectives on the opportunity for Europe to accelerate SAF production, the impact of regulation on the global market, the easy wins for the aviation industry, and the opportunities for eFuels in the market. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the event and for our Q&A, which will be in the last 10 minutes of the discussion. This webinar is being hosted ahead of Sustainable Aviation Futures Europe, taking place in Amsterdam from the 15th to the 17th of June. The event will bring together 1,000 attendees from across the world to discuss SAF strategies and decarbonisation ambitions, global policies, and mapping out the global progress towards net zero by 2050. With over 60 hours of content, and 10 hours of networking, don't miss the opportunity to connect with the industry. Today, we'll provide a snapshot of the topics covered today, with an extensive focus on eFuels and the European policy ambitions at the event. Our confirmed speakers today will also be joining us in different capacities in Amsterdam. Taking place at the Beurs van Berlage in Amsterdam, the conference includes the ability to attend our networking dinner and drinks reception, join our newly launched SAFTA Awards, attend breakfast briefings and workshops from leading aviation experts, and visit our largest exhibition hall to date, with the following companies partnering us at the event. I hope to see you in a month's time in Amsterdam. For all of those who you have not yet booked, please do reach out to my colleague, whose details can be found on screen, and confirm your passes before our price increase next week. For those of you interested in our global events, we have 4 remaining events this year, taking place in Hong Kong, Singapore, Houston, and our Amsterdam event in June. For more information, please do reach out to me after the webinar. Before I hand over to today's moderator, this session will be recorded and sent to you after the discussion. As mentioned, there is also a Q&A running throughout, so please do use this opportunity to ask questions, and our speakers will look to answer them by the end. With that, I would like to say thank you to our speakers today and hand you over to today's moderator, Leon Puls, who's Managing Director at Energy Investment Management. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for introducing me and introducing us in this panel. You're very welcome, participants during this webinar. Feel free to ask questions. And let's start with a short introduction. So my name is Leon Puls, Managing Partner of Energy Investment Management. We're very active in green gas, green fuels, biomass to liquids, more at the upstream side of the value chain. And with me, I have several experts. They will introduce themselves. Maybe Esther Hegel, you can introduce yourself.
Yes. First of all, welcome, and well, thank you so much for inviting me to this exciting panel. So my name is Esther Hegel. I'm Technical Associate Director at the Roundtable on Sustainable Biomaterials. So we're a global nonprofit association working to decarbonize hard-to-abate sectors. And the perspective I want to bring today is more coming from the regulation side, so sustainable certification, what it means for market and scale up of eFuels, but also happy to share some insights from our global perspective. So we're working on roadmaps across Asia Pacific, Africa, Brazil, and India. And last but not least, I'm happy to share how I think book and claim could help accelerate the eFuel market. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your introduction, Esther. Christiana Scaldaveri from Worley. Maybe you can introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the invitation today. So Christiana Scaldaveri, low carbon fuels consultant at Worley. As a quick background, industrial chemist with 10 years experience across renewable fuels, bioenergy and policy. Got a strong policy perspective from the UK Climate Change Committee and technical expertise with masters and PhD on sustainable aviation fuels. And at Worley, I work on sustainability policy and regulation aligned with SAF deployment strategies. So it's a real pleasure to be here today discussing all these different topics for the SAF supply chain build out the next years. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your introduction. Karel Hauptmeier, maybe you can introduce yourself.
Certainly, absolute pleasure being here. Karel Hauptmeier, my name. I'm one of the founders and managing director of Norsk eFuel. At Norsk eFuel, we are a project developer in the field of eSAF, focused specifically in the Nordics of Europe. So covering Norway, Sweden, and Finland, as we believe these locations to be perfect stepping stones for the European eSAF industrial development. So joining here today to maybe share a few insights from the point of view of a project developer, and obviously to listen to my esteemed colleagues here to learn a bit more on the topic itself.
Yeah, thank you, Carl, for the introduction. Now to our last participant, Ashi Hosseini from STIP. Maybe you can introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me today. My name is Ashi Hosseini, and I'm the Environmental Strategy Lead at STIP. I have been involved and responsible for shaping and the strategy and the requirements for the STIP product commission, which is helping the airlines to manage the regulations, but also to predict the cost, manage the SAF and reporting. So based on that, I have been involved in many discussions and conversations with different airlines around the world, in Europe, in Middle East, in APAC, and also in US. So I'm bringing the airline perspective today. So happy to have this conversation with everyone today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, all. I think quite an interesting range of backgrounds. And that is, of course, a good food for thought when we look to the eFuel value chain. When we look to leadership in Europe around eSAF and the policy frameworks that are there and that should speed up the implementation of eSAF in Europe. And I was wondering, what are your views on it? Who likes to start a discussion on this topic?
Well, happy to give it a start. I believe if we talk about Europe and eSAF, in essence, there's no way around mentioning the Refuel EU Aviation Initiative. I believe this is quite a unique and very strong signal that was sent and is sent by the European Commission and Europe itself. And I believe most of the audience is going to be very familiar with this regulation, but maybe just to summarize it in a nutshell, why this is so important. This regulation provides clear mandated targets for blending quotas, both for SAF, but also for eSAF specifically, going forward, starting in 2030, if referring to eSAF now, incrementally increasing up to 2050 with sub-targets. And I believe this is quite unique and creates a certain market, or hopefully creates a market certainty. And we're probably going to talk about potential shortfalls later on. That is very specific.
Are there other participants that like to add to this point?
Yeah, no, I think, Carl, as Carl mentioned, in Europe today, so we really have, the demand that has been created with regulation, with the Refuel Aviation obligations. I would say, particularly for eSAF, the market mechanism needs to evolve to deliver it. I think, there is many elements that we'll talk about later. But yeah, particularly for eSAF, offtake market is still not fully functional, and I think it's crucial to have, an operational eSAF market kick off in Europe. STIP, I think we'll discuss a little bit more about the STIP later today. It's a really important initiative to support the first movers to achieve FID and go into the construction and really unlock, I think, the supply chain of eSAF. But with this consolidated SAF framework under the Refuel Aviation Commission, so we do see it's great. It's a guaranteed demand is there, and now we need to work out how we make this really good market signal to leap it from ambition to real supply and industrial deployment.
Thank you for your comments. Maybe when we look at the airline perspective, Ashi, maybe you can share there some views from your side on the regulation that is there in European Union.
Yeah, I think from an airline perspective, this initiative is very important because somehow all these regulations and the cost is very overwhelming for the airlines. And if we don't have this kind of mandates and regulations in place, the adoption becomes very difficult. So from that point of view, I think this kind of mandates and regulations from EU is very good, because we can see that with SAF, if this mandate was not in place, many airlines would not, be able to take the step, because, it's a lot of risk and cost that is involved. So from that perspective, I think it's a good way to initiate and make the airlines to start this initiative. And also because once you are entering this market, you are processing the data, then you also see the challenges, and then you have the possibility to improve, which will have a positive impact and effect on the whole process. So I think from that perspective, it's quite important to have this kind of mandates and regulations.
Thank you. Esther, do you have something to add to this discussion about the regulations, policy frameworks?
Yes, I would like to echo what the other said. So I think the European Union is really pioneering with this mandate, and specifically the sub-mandate for eFuels. So they really like the global North Star when it comes to this specific type of demand-side policies. And we see a lot of traction around the globe, everyone looking at this mandate and now really trying to see what is happening with the market, what can be learned from it, and also looking into replicating it potentially. And maybe the one addition I would like to make is that also along with this, there are very specific regulations around sustainability, which are around RFNBOs and RCFs. So those are the type of fuels we're talking of today. And I think they're also one element that are very relevant to know about for market access. And there the criteria are quite specific in the European context. And yeah, happy to dive a bit deeper on this topic later. But yeah, just echoing about the relevance of this specific policy in the EU.
When I summarize, then yeah, we see that the mandates, the policy that the European Union developed is quite well to really let eSAF take off. The question is, one point is policy regulation. The other point is also what more is needed to get projects built. I think another interesting topic is the second item that was already announced, that was impending eSAF mandates having an impact, and has STIP done enough to satisfy the eFuel mandate? Maybe you can elaborate a bit on that. And then I also look to Carl, working on a project development, making next steps to go to financial close. I think, yeah, what is more needed than regulation to really make these steps?
Well, I think it's always easy to ask for more, and obviously I do have a list of things that could be improved, and that's quite clear. I think truth of the matter is projects do struggle to take the final step towards final investment decision, and we need to ask why that is. In essence, if we look at the lay of the land, there is a couple, I mean, depending on how you want to count it, but let's say 2 handful, 3 handful of project developers active today in Europe, driving forward projects with quite extensive cost on the development side. You are spending close to 50 million euros sometimes to get a project from development up to FID. So you can just calculate how much money is currently being put into this from the private sector to develop the eSAF market actually going forward. Nonetheless, we have not yet seen an FID, even though the market incentive is quite strong with the Refuel EU Aviation Initiative. So the question is basically, what is the gap? What is missing? And I think the issue we're having is that we're still talking about a new industry which needs to be set up, which is addressing a market which is 100% dependent on regulation. So any sort of uncertainty on the regulation side, or anything that is unclear, is very difficult. While at the same time, you always have the discussion between the first mover advantage versus a first mover disadvantage. And I think this is what the EU has so far not answered yet. And this is where STIP really comes in and could provide an answer, that what is needed is a very clear support to this general market outlook, which has been created now via the Refuel EU Aviation. You need the incentive that sort of pushes those first projects over the line. And that is the first mover incentive that you need to provide. And you cannot provide this by project subsidy scheme such as EU Innovation. You need to actually target the industry. And they're good examples in where you can see that this has worked in the past. I'm not saying this is what the EU needs, because the EU is different than every other country, but just as an example, giving what we've seen when the Inflation Reduction Act was announced in the US, for example, you've seen a run towards investments because you knew that this would run out, right? There was a certain time window which was opened where there would have been a support for projects which managed to get into operation. They would benefit tremendously, and they would basically pave the way for all future industries and projects to come down that line. And I think these sort of incentives is what is needed, and this is where STIP, to some extent, tackles and tries to address this by addressing and opening up certain avenues within the EU that enable sort of this first mover advantage. And I think that is what is needed, and that is what is really good. But now we need to see this implemented, and we need to see this implemented fast, because we're already late if you think about the targets we have with having fuel available by 2030.
The other participants, do they have something to add to Carl? That's about has STIP done enough to satisfy the eFuel mandate?
I think I can mention, we recognize STIP is a very important step in the right direction in supporting, the first movers and help projects to reach RID. However, as Carl mentioned, I think probably not sufficient in its own to fully deliver the eFuel mandate. The main gap remains, the commercial viability of projects. So we know the economics are still the biggest barrier for eSAF. That's why STIP, with funding, with potential CCFDs auctions, is the key to close the gap between the eSAF costs of production and the actual what fuel suppliers and the airlines can pay. So I think STIP is a key initiative to kick in, the supply. However, we know in medium and long term, other elements that's, bringing down the cost of renewables, the hydrogen production cost needs to come down to support the scale up. But again, potential other incentives, as for example, tax credits, is key. It's really important to attract, I think, investors and developers to scale up and to bring more projects to the pipeline. So I think it was a really good point as mentioned.
Thank you for adding. Esther or Ashi, do you have points to add?
Yes, maybe I would like to add that indeed there's only so much also policies can do. So I agree that there could be more different type of supplier demand side policies supporting it. Maybe one thing I would like to highlight that there are many things in the ecosystem outside of policies that could help ramp up. So talking about offtake agreements that could help supporting new financing mechanisms that we actually see are now happening for bio-based stuff, for example, for HEFA-based, where we see that first project-based financing could work, for example, in the Netherlands. And I think also there's quite some learnings also how smart financing could help to pay a small part of the long bill. And then last comment, that what we really see is that there's also an increasing role of corporations or corporates beyond the airlines that can help support the scale up by purchasing SAF or Scope 3 claims, for example, via book and claim registries, which is more in the voluntary market. And I think this is a quite powerful tool. So it's in the end, it's all about sharing the pieces of cake, so to reduce the cost. And I think this is really a powerful one. So looking at the end of the market, how offtakes could be accelerated by, for example, book and claim mechanisms or different financing options.
Can you elaborate a bit more about book and claim? I think
Yes.
for some of the participants of the webinar, it's
Yes.
maybe a new way of approaching.
So there are different chain of custody models, how claims can be allocated along the value chain. So there's, for example, mass balance, which I think is well known. And book and claim is basically, it's a segregation of the claim. So the SAF is supplied physically at one location where it's produced, for example, in Brazil, but no claim is made at the location where it's produced, and the system would allow to transact this claim, and it is paid for by another off-taker, for example, in the Nordics, where they're willing to pay for it. And what we see that those Scope 3 claims, which can be used for corporate accounting measures, can really help finance SAF uptake. And at the moment, this is on the voluntary market, so it cannot be linked to mandates. However, we see different jurisdictions moving ahead. For example, Brazil has a policy directly supporting book and claim mechanisms. So we see there's growing interest to really use book and claim as a tool. However, we have to see, of course, it has to be done very carefully to ensure there's no double counting and there's credibility in doing it. It was just saying it's one tool that can connect this corporate demand for sustainable solution with actual suppliers.
Thank you. Ashi, maybe do you like to add something about the role of STIP and the eFuel mandates?
Yeah, I actually would like to add, I mean, I think it's, as the other participant mentioned, I think this support mechanism and the long-term offtake agreement and the policies are very important because, as I mentioned, it's this initiative, the mandates are very good because they, help the airlines to take the step and start using SAF and later on eFuel. But I also would like to emphasize that, the cost is a big impact on the airlines. And I think it's something that we should not ignore. It's a reality. And especially now, with the situation in the Middle East and the oil crisis that we have, airlines are under a lot of pressure when it comes to the cost for jet fuel and biofuel SAF. So I think, and we don't know how long, the long-term consequences of this, it's very uncertain. So I think adding the eFuel, even though the initiative itself, it's very good and important, but I think it must be, a supporting mechanism or a type of allowances to help the airlines, because otherwise this mandate will not be, implemented. I think we already seen a lot of airlines who are trying to postpone the mandate because of the cost pressure. So I think we should not ignore the fact of the cost. So what I have seen when I've been talking to the airlines, so when you have big airlines, they have the capacity to take the risk and, do these long-term offtake agreements. But when you look at other airlines, medium size or smaller airlines, they are not actually capable to absorb this cost and also the risk around the uncertainty and the availability. So I think this is very important, and we should really take the learnings from the SAF implementation if we want to make the eFuel deployment successful. It's really the key for the success, because it's very similar in the way of reporting and claiming the cost, but of course it's more complex and the cost is higher. So I just want to, emphasize on that. It's very important.
When you say we come to the cost at a later moment, what's the eSAF pricing? But maybe at that time you can also elaborate what is payable from an airline perspective. I think I understand your point, but it's good to at our last discussion point to discuss a bit more about the pricing and what is acceptable pricing. I'd like to go to Carol. Carol, you would like to add something to the discussion? I noticed.
Well, yes, but please, Ashraf, if you want to add first to the question raised to you.
Yeah, I think what we can do to help the airlines with the cost, of course, the Scope 3 certificates mentioned by Esther is a very good mechanism. And that's what we are trying to do with airlines, to help them understand that, you don't need to absorb all of the cost of SAF. You can actually make your customers to contribute to this. So this is a mechanism that is very useful. It has to be, easier and more simplified to do. But I think this is a very good mechanism. Another parameter here is the claiming of SAF. So what we have seen already now with a lot of airlines is that, they pay the premium for the SAF, but then there are some limitations in the regulation, especially for EU ETS, and they are not able to claim that SAF that they have paid the premium for. And, as a result, they don't have the emission reduction and they are not able to reduce their cost. So I think we should, go more towards the book and claim and maybe make more harmonization in the regulation and allow the airlines to either have the possibility to have a more flexibility to control where the SAF is delivered to them so they can claim the maximum part of the SAF, or maybe make it easier for them to claim for all the SAF that they have been paying for. And I think it becomes even more important with the eSAF because the cost of eSAF is even higher than SAF. So I think it gives a motivation for the airlines if they can see that, I pay a premium, but then at the end I can claim and I can reduce my emissions.
Yeah, thank you for already elaborating. I think in the end, pricing is it's all about pricing in the end. So it's good to touch already at this moment at that point. Carl, do you have to add something from a project developer's perspective? How do you look at this kind of aspects?
Yeah, I believe maybe just to share a little bit of a different view. While I agree with many of the points raised by Esther and Ashraf, I believe I have a few maybe nuances where we'll look at them differently. I mean, maybe let's start with the book and claim. I think in essence we are supporting this as well, because in the end it's facilitating access to markets as well as facilitating the access to where you can inject the fuel and how you can actually provide the fuel to where it's needed. So decoupling a little bit your logistic chain from the final user is very beneficial. However, and I believe Esther also hinted at this already, you need to be very careful about this, not only with regards to sustainability criteria, but also to some extent, and this may now sound like protectionism, but I think this is actually not to be underestimated. We're talking about nascent industries here which need to be built up and developed. So to some extent, having a completely globalized and very open, fluent book and claim is gonna destroy this sort of certainty and investment certainty which you're actually looking for in order to get the first projects off the ground. So there's a nuanced balance that you kind of need to take, making it easier for projects and customers to access fuels and to find each other, while at the same time giving sort of certainty that it doesn't go out of control and sort of left and right new products are popping up that are sort of hard to anticipate and or to regulate and control. So I think that's maybe just a statement. And the second point I wanted to raise, we are talking about the airlines now quite often, and I think this is correct because the airlines are in the end the customers picking up the bill because they're using the fuel. But I think we need to remember that the Refuel EU Aviation Initiative in its core is not aiming at the airlines, right? It's aiming at the fuel suppliers. The fuel suppliers obviously are passing on costs to the airlines, but this is the conundrum. So whenever we're talking with airlines, and the reason why we as North Ski Fuels project developer, we have signed offtake agreements with airlines, not with fuel suppliers, even though the fuel suppliers are the ones mandated. So why is that? Well, because there's a different incentive behind. The airlines see the costs coming their way, and they're the ones who actually would like to do something about it. So some of them are willing to take more risk than others, but it's not their expertise and they should not be asked to do this. It's really hard for the airlines to pick the right projects to bet on, to sign 10-year offtake agreements. This is not part of their typical engagement, right? That is not part of the role description. So the problem we have is currently that we basically have this little bit of a conundrum that those who are sort of in the end target, or who are in the end sort of being targeted with the fuel, or the users of the fuel, are not directly linked to the mandates, while at the same time they're the ones picking up the bill and they're the ones potentially willing to sign the offtake agreements. So there's a little bit shift, and I think this is one of the potential shortcomings without being able to offer the perfect solution. But this is where you see that regulation can actually circumvent this. If you look at the German example of the certificate trading system, where, for example, it is possible to just access a certain market by giving other players the opportunity to play in it, generate positive certificates, and then hand them over to whoever is not fulfilling certain quotas or criteria. So I think just wanted to throw this out there. And then otherwise, obviously agree, if we stay within the framework, I'm fully with Ashraf, we need to reduce somehow the burden. And I think the core issue is probably not necessarily the price increase, because many people overestimate what we're actually talking about. We're talking about 1.2% eSAF sort of mandated, On a standard airline, 25% of the ticket price is roughly fuel. So 1.2% being of these 25% is actually targeted. So even if you talk about an 8 times cost increase, you would talk about a 2% ticket price increase, which is way within the fluctuations. I think the difficulty is that the margins are very short, very small. So it's not so much about the price increase that the customer is going to feel it, or the consumer. It's about competitiveness. And so in the end, the regulation is fine. We are not really looking at the price spike. I think the sort of the issue that many airlines have with the current regulation, and the fear that they have, is that it's not sufficiently protected against outside European competition via bunkering and other sort of loopholes that may allow you to generate a more beneficial sort of flight path, which will then draw traffic away from Europe or European hubs to other locations.
How do the others look at these interesting topics Carl addressed? Ashi,
Yeah,
with
I
your,
just wanted to, so thank you, Carl. I totally agree. And I think that there should be a balance. But when it comes to the fact that Refuel EU is more designed for airport and airlines, I would not agree to that, because at the end, the last burden is actually on the airline, because they need, and that is actually the problem, because the airlines have no control over the blending of the SAF or where the SAF is delivered. But at the end, they need to report, they need to claim, they need to verify. And those are the issues that we see now with the SAF reporting, and the challenges that we need to resolve, because there is misalignment. So the producer and the supplier can claim or use a certain feedstock, but then when it comes to the airline is not allowed to claim that specific feedstock. So I think, even though it's not directly impacting airlines, but at the end they carry the burden, and I think those complexity becomes too much for the airlines, and they feel overwhelmed. And also when it comes to the cost, you are definitely right. It's not because it's a big cost, but it's the margin that is very thin for the airlines. So even a small cost increase will have a big impact of the competitiveness for the airlines.
Absolutely. Maybe just to clarify, I think you're exactly pointing out what I was trying to elaborate. I think the issue is the airlines are the ones impacted at the end, but they're not the ones directly written into the regulation, which limits their actions, right? It basically puts them at the end of the black box, which they have limited influence in, and I think that's part of the problem we're looking at.
Definitely.
And so, absolutely. And competitiveness, obviously, I think that's the reason. 2% increase, as long as that would, if everyone would be impacted by it, no one would feel it in their margins. But if only some are and some not, then it becomes an issue.
Thank you. Esther, do you have something to add to this price discussion?
Maybe just one thing that stood out for me is that also a lot has to do with data transparency and knowledge of how costs are generated to better understand how prices could be distributed. So I think also there is a lot of interest of other stakeholders in the ecosystem to support, for example, airports, but at the moment they're not in the value chain line. They don't have access. They don't have so much knowledge about what type of SAF is at the airport, how is it blended, where is it used. And I think the same also for airlines, like having an increased transparency, I think, of the pipelines, of the blending, of the pricing would really help the whole ecosystem to support SAF ramp up even more. I know if the others want to comment, if you agree that I think it has a lot to do with maybe sharing data more effectively moving forward.
Thank you. Christiane, do you have something to add to this pricing discussion? I'm very interested also in your view on current price level, expected price level.
And now I think, I agree with like what Carl and as I was saying. Even though the mandates are not like directly subject to airlines, I think the whole supply chain, this integration between the whole value chain needs to be better framed and aligned because as we discussed here, so today the airlines are exposed to supply and price uncertainty, and they need to comply, within a market which is not fully developed yet. So it brings a lot of uncertainties. And when we don't have that offtake agreements between developers, the fuel suppliers, and the airlines, we kind of bring more risks to the business case of these developers. This is something we discuss a lot with our clients when we're trying to develop a business case for the projects. So there is a lot of elements that also, when combined with the cost of compliance, I think, as Esther mentioned, so the RFMBO rules, the real costs of eSAF today makes all the value chain set up even more complex. Yeah, I agree with what has been said.
Thank you. Esther, you would like to add something?
Yes, maybe following up on this, I fully agree. So when it comes to eFuel, the criteria that are out there for RFMBO, so renewable fuels of non-biological origins, they are even stricter and more complex than what we have for biofuels, for example. And we really see that this is giving a lot of challenges to project developers to comply with those rules. And they actually reopened the RFMBO criteria for consultation a bit earlier now than expected, because there's a lot of criticism and feedback, specifically, for example, around how is the electricity source, where is it coming from, is it additional, also competition, increasing competition with other renewable electricity users like data centers. But also, for example, a bottleneck we hear a lot about is about CO2 sourcing. So there are rules about unavoidable industrial CO2 sources. So this means if there's an industrial source that's unavoidable, the CO2 can be used. But for example, in the European context, this is only possible for a certain time frame. So also there, it's quite a risk and challenges for project developers to comply and to build their technologies around those criteria. And just last point, that on top of this, also producers, they want to comply with other standards outside the EU, for example, CORSIA, which is another framework, a global framework where more than 140 countries signed against. So I think there's really a lot of complexity around certification, fulfilling requirements for eFuel producers. And I think there's a lot we can do to harmonize and to simplify them, to take some burden from project developers, and to get rid of this bottleneck, basically.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Carol. Help for project developers. I think that sounds great. You're working on your bringing one project to FID. When you would bring your 10th project to FID, what kind of price reduction would be possible? I think knowing this kind of processes in other subsectors in the energy, with the first projects, the price level, that I think is a different price level than when it's more a common commodity. How do you look at that capability to reduce price?
Yeah, I think that's obviously the typical question being raised, and maybe a bit of a disclaimer up front. I'm more conservative by nature when it comes to future price projections than many others, and than many studies that I've read and reviewed the assumptions on. And let me give you my reason for that. In the end, the truth of the matter of eFuel is always that you have a complex conversion process which requires a lot of electricity. So that gives you and CO2, that gives you three limiting factors in how low you can bring the price down. It's always going to be the price of electricity, which basically defines 50% of your OPEX, roughly, obviously, depending on what the price of electricity actually is. So the first assumption of lowering eFuel prices as well, will the price of renewable power go down in the future? And everyone knows that, well, on the one hand side, you do see price projections of renewable power being as cheap as 10 cents per megawatt hour reliably, right, including battery storage in the near-term future. On the other hand, you currently have wind projects not being developed because they say the strike price is too low for them to be justified. right?
Mm-hmm.
So you do have a mismatch already today. So my first assumption is, well, power prices will probably not go down that much more, right? There will always be sweet spots somewhere around the world, but in essence, I think power prices will probably not go to this magic 10 cents per megawatt hour in a large scale. The second point then being, well, what about CO2? You always have this discussion and issue. Well, you do need to source your CO2, and CO2 is a potential bottleneck. And CO2 is always not necessarily available where the power is very cheap. So again, that means most likely you will actually transport the CO2 because you'd rather be where the power is. So that means transport cost of CO2, liquefaction of CO2, that gives you sort of a floor price of CO2 that you can't really go below. Which brings us then to the project cost, and that's the capex. And I think there, truth of the matter is that 2/3 of the projects which we're building is not innovative necessarily by definition. It's the first of a kind, but the technology itself is chemical industry, it's chemical engineering, which has been around for 100 years. So yes, there are learnings, yes, there's sort of economies to be generated by repetition, but you will not have a cost curve which will halve production, because you're not in the business of standard modularized units which are just going to be pumped out sort of on in a fabrication, which is different for the electrolyzers. There we can actually do see strong cost reduction potential in the future, but that's only 1/3 of the capex. So long story short, what I'm getting at is electricity costs may go down further. That will positively impact CO2 prices, may also go down further if we actually manage to open up CCS and CCU joint infrastructures. Capex will most likely go down, primarily driven, however, by electrolyzer development, not so much by the eSAF plans. And actually, I believe the biggest driver, and I think many people underestimate it, is that the cost of capital is simply going to go down, because that is what currently makes these projects expensive today. They are first of a kind. The capital cost is high, and capital cost for large capex heavy investments, you will feel that in your production price. So very long story short, what do I think can be done in the near-term future? Well, I would say near-term future prices will actually you will not see a very strong shift. In the midterm to long-term future, I would say you can see them go down by 30%, but I would not actually be more aggressive than that. You will have niche projects which will have very low production costs, but that will not be the global market.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your insights. And I think also we had 4 topics. One of the topics we didn't touch yet, that's about transformative partnerships to scale collaboration in industry progress. And when we look to the pricing discussion and the points Carl just made, and that take it a bit further when you talk about partnerships, about collaboration in the value chain. Is there also a solution? And then I'm very curious how Ashi looks to that from an airline perspective. Are there collaboration models possible with the airlines to really help this price level, this price potential reduction to occur?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is definitely this, collaboration between the different stakeholders in the value chain that we have seen that can actually have a positive impact, because it will, increase the demand, and then hopefully we can reduce the prices. I think what we can do, and this is what we have already started, is to try, because we are connected to the airlines, but we are also talking to fuel suppliers and fuel producers to, try. I think one big challenge that needs to be resolved is, the infrastructure and the data governance. I think a lot of data is being delivered, manually. A lot of workflows are manually, and each stakeholders in the value chain, they have their own systems, formats, and then at the end, the airlines will receive, SAF certificates from different suppliers, different format, different information. So I think that is a challenge that actually we already have the solution. I'm actually shocked that we are still using PDF in the AI era. So I think one thing that we should avoid is, no more PDF, and try to work on a more harmonized and seamless data flow between the different stakeholders. I think that would help to improve the process a lot. So that would be my my suggestion, a number one improvement that we can do in terms of collaboration. And it's also important to understand different stakeholders' pain points. When we had this discussion with the suppliers, we saw that there are actually, some challenges that they have also in terms of data certification that, airlines are not aware of. So I think collaboration also, bring the stakeholders closer to each other, and you increase the understanding, and your work becomes much more efficient.
Thank you for sharing your insights. Esther or Christiane, do you have something to add there?
Well, just saying I couldn't agree more. So I think we're doing a lot of this multi-stakeholder organizational work. So our membership is across producers, suppliers, but also NGOs. And we think it's really important to get those people together on the table and to discuss around solution. Maybe one angle, I think what we see is that we should look at eFuels from a systems perspective a bit more. So in the end, it's also about policies around carbon management. As we heard, it's about what do we do about CCS and CCU. It's strongly linked to hydrogen economy. So also policies or any movements around hydrogen are directly impacting those fuel producers. And last but not least, we see a lot of potential for cross-sector collaboration. So there are lots of byproducts that could be used by the chemical sector. And also there's no streamlining yet when it comes to policies or certification. So I think if we look at the global transition of industries, I think we could also really come to some solutions that also support eFuels even more.
Thank you. Christiane,
yeah, I think just complementing what Isa was mentioning, and if you look at the beginning of the supply chain, so I think it's really important to build partnerships to unlock the feedstock supply chain to produce a lower cost eSAF, to provide more competitiveness and less government reliance incentives to the market in the future. So I think this is a key point to mention in addition to what we've been discussing here today.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts. I think it's a good moment to go to the questions. We have several questions. Let me start with the question from, let's see, Jordi Casademund. He has a question about involve airports as stakeholders in use of green energy sources for aircraft fuel, such as SAF or eSAF. Their operations create pollution in their area, so they should be part of the solution. Maybe, Ashi, you can, when you have your view on that question, you can respond. You're on mute, Ashi. You're on mute. Sorry.
Yeah, I think the involvement of the airport is very important. And I think that advantage that we have, because SITA has different business units. So we have SITA for aircraft, but also SITA for airports. So we have this connection to the airport. And I definitely think that it's important to collaborate with airports because, both from the emission perspective, but also from the SAF and fuel perspective, airlines and airports are very much connected to each other and dependent on each other also. So definitely this is something that we see, and we are trying to improve and increase this partnership with airports as part of the collaborations that we are doing and partners that we are working with.
Thank you. We have a question from Mohamed Oasis Kokar. It's to Carl and Christiane, and what your perspective is on technology pathways. Do you expect the projects to continue focus on higher TRL routes such as Fischer-Tropsch, or will newer pathways like methanol to jet gain more attention, considering fuel yield, cost, scalability, ASTM certification requirements? Carl, maybe you can elaborate on that first.
Happy to take that, and I think the answer is I'm a strong believer that we'll see both, simply because I can't see a clear winner. And just to be clear, we as a project developer, we're quite agnostic to which solution to be chosen. Clearly, for now, we have settled for the Fischer-Tropsch pathway. There are multiple reasons, but one of the reasons simply being we do not want to add additional risk to a first-of-a-kind project, right? So I think that is quite clear why we're choosing the highest or most advanced technology route. Now, this being said, though, we have investigated this quite in detail, and I believe both pathways have their advantages and disadvantages. And if I may simplify it in a way, both can be quite similar with regards to efficiencies, yields, and cost, what can be achieved. The difference being, to some extent, that the Fischer-Tropsch pathway requires a certain size of projects for it to be efficient, to then have the product upgrading directly connected to it, which allows you to have a neat eSAF, which you can then send out, which has multiple advantages also with regards to logistics and market approach. Whereas methanol to jet can run a little bit of can more easily run a different system, where you can have multiple smaller scale methanol projects dotted around, and then pooling the methanol for a centralized methanol to jet refinery. Now, that has certain advantages in the sense that you can access smaller sort of volumes of power, so potentially getting beneficial sites in place, and pooling is always a benefit, but obviously that makes these projects also interdependent, so you kind of also need to have an infrastructure already built up for this to be then efficient. So long-winded answer for a simple solution. I believe you're going to see both, truth be told.
Thank you. Christiane, do you have something to add to these technology pathways?
I totally agree. I think exactly what we brought with, our study with IATA on global feedstock assessment and technology. So there is no winner. So we see the most developed technologies coming to the market first. For example, the Fischer-Tropsch, the emerging technologies, the methanol to jet, the alcohol to jet. In some scenarios, they will play a key role, and as they emerge, as they develop, and they evolve with TRL, they will have scope in the market. So for sure.
Yeah, thank you. Esther, what do you like to add?
Yeah, just adding that I fully agree. In the end, we will need all of them to meet our climate goals. So we need many of them to succeed, many technologies. And what we see a lot in the studies, it really depends on the specific country's circumstances. So what is the infrastructure? What are the feedstocks? And we also see a lot of potential for all type of hybrid pathways. So in some countries, we have a lot of biomass that can be gasified, and then yields are increased with additional hydrogen, for example. So it's really, we see those routes not being fully separate, but really mixing up to find local solutions that really match the demand and the infrastructure and the feedstock base.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. We have a question from Mr. Oude-Leverink, and he asked, when eSAF projects are being developed, many projects stop at FID simply because there is a residual risk that is not covered by any of the project parties, licensor, EPC, project owner, financiers. Can STIP be used to cover this residual risks or de-risk future projects simply because one gets built? Well,
I would say yes, it can, but it does not yet. I think there's a truth in the statement, and I think I would, however, like to turn it around a little bit, right? Any project typically has residual risk somewhere. The question is if that risk is deemed acceptable for the potential return on it, right? So there are two axis points to it. Either it's very, very interesting, economically speaking, to bet on these projects, or you manage to de-risk it further. As we're talking about very capex intensive industry, however, the risk appetite is rather low because the risk of failure is too high. So meaning you should really tackle the risk aspect. And I think there are multiple pathways which STIP basically opens opportunities to. Those can be direct involvement via national funding. It can also be insurances given out, I think, which is not to be underestimated. You are talking about potential and this is not strictly speaking STIP in itself, but I mean that this is sort of part and implied in finding solutions. You have already opportunities such as the SAF allowances, which could be extended, making it easier for airlines and or off-takers to sign more committing and binding and thus stronger off-take agreements again, which would be a de-risking opportunity. So I think that there are many angles where you can improve the overall balance of sort of where does the risk actually lie. Because I believe as it stands today, it's also not that there is a very obvious shortcoming, right? It's not like the technology providers are not willing to provide performance warranties. It's not like the EPC providers are not willing to provide performance warranties, or the off-takers are not willing to provide any liabilities. All of them are willing to go a certain way, but we are talking about very heavy investments, right? So I think it is basically STIP can just support by giving this little bit of extra by providing, I believe, primarily guarantees, access to good loans and backing.
You, are there one of the other participants like to add something? There's a question from Peter Keutgens, and he said, Carl mentioned electricity as a bottleneck, lowering the e-fuel prices. But really, it's available of green electricity. That's the issue, isn't it? What can be done or is being done to increase capacity? Yeah. What's your view on that, Carl?
Yeah, I think it's actually not availability that is the issue. It's typically the availability of power at a given location at a given point in time that is an issue, right? And this is actually where eFuel come in quite handy, as you don't need the power to be transported to where you are. You should go to where the power is abundantly available, right? I think that's sort of the idea of eFuels, because what you do is you take rather fluctuating in its essence and hard to transport and store energy source, electricity, and you transform it into a chemical energy carrier, which is very easily transportable and storable. And I think that is the beauty of it, right? So availability, yes, it is a bottleneck if you develop projects, but only in a sense that it challenges you to find the right locations to where it isn't a bottleneck anymore, right? So all the locations which we have identified, we are there because the grid is strong, because there's excess power currently available, which we thus get reflected in comparably low power prices, which are much lower than in areas where you currently have high consumption of power, obviously, right? We don't want to be where there's a lot of competition for the power, because if there's a lot of competition for the power, it drives power prices up. Now, obviously, there's always a market here, right? When power prices are low, more industry is going to go there. Power price is going to go up a bit again. But in the end, that is sort of the general idea of it, that you go where the power price is low.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts. I look at the time. I think we have 1-2 minutes, so very short, and there will be a hard stop at the end. So sorry, Esther.
Yes, I just wanted to add that I fully agree. However, we still need to, we should emphasize we need a lot of build of renewable electricity to decarbonize all of our industries. So there is not enough renewable electricity. And also looking at what countries are planning to build out, I think it's not able to cover what we need to decarbonize all our industries. And just mentioning also for eFuels, there is competition because so many different industries want access to this renewable power. And I heard recently, I said that there, for example, this fast-growing demand for data centers for electricity is really a source of competition for eFuel producers. So I fully agree that the first projects are going where electricity is, but I think in the long term, we definitely just need more of this sustainable and green electricity and need to ensure it's built out quicker.
Thank you. I fully agree. But I think I have to close the session because otherwise we have a hard stop. So thank you for contributing to this webinar, speakers, and also participants. Thank you for joining. Looking forward to meeting you 15 to 17 June in Amsterdam at the Sustainable Aviation Futures Congress. I think it's a nice opportunity to have more talks about a very interesting eSAF discussion. and happy to meet you there at the event. I think most speakers are available at the event, so looking forward to see you there. But I understand from Sustainable Aviation Futures that there will be a hard stop at the end. It's not yet there. Maybe Harry, you can come in, or you can close the session. Thank you all for participating.